Hello folks, you're very welcome to episode 11 of Resonating with Emmet O'Malley. That's me. New podcast music this week. I thought, just on reflection of the episodes that we have done so far, there's a kind of a more relaxed vibe to this music than the previous music. This is a little bit more of the tone of the podcast, I think. I think up till now it's been a little bit, hey, welcome to the podcast. Whoa. Very kind of glitzy, space age kind of music, like Las Vegas in the 80s, but on a space station, something like that. Anyway, gonna veer away from that look for a while. Thanks for listening to the show. It's great to have you here. To support this podcast, as always, I will direct you towards patreon.com/Emmet O'Malley, and on there I upload exclusive music and videos every month, and I do a weekly podcast called Private Pod. That is on there. That's just me chatting shit every week. But if you want to hear a bit of that, well, patreon.com/Emmet O'Malley. Also, why not head over to YouTube, subscribe, youtube.com/Emmet O'Malley Music, Instagram, Emmet O'Malley Music, Facebook, Emmet O'Malley Music. Shall I go on naming social media platforms? Maybe not. Let's leave it there. Apart from the digital world, I was out in the real physical world this weekend for the first time in a really long time, doing a gig in front of human beings in a pub, and it was really nice. Thank you, Whelan's of Croydon, and the lovely people that were there on Saturday night. We had a really good time. There was a lot of, I guess, joy in the room, you know. Everybody was pretending, I guess, in a way that the pandemic was completely over. And like, I guess generally, probably a lot of the people there were vaccinated and all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, there's a kind of a more of a sense of security, which feels a bit dangerous. Hopefully I will be alive next week, but things opened up and music is back. It was nice to play music in front of people and not see them kind of slowly disappearing off the screen like happens on Zoom gigs, or Mary P has left. It's way more socially awkward to have to leave in person when I start playing in a pub. And if Mary P gets up and leaves, then it just looks bad. It looks bad for everyone. It looks bad for Mary. Doesn't have any patience. Looks bad for me. Sound terrible. So whatever it is, this reality of playing music in front of others, it's more socially considerate, let's just say. Nicky Larkin, writer, director, is on the podcast today. We had a lovely chat. Nicky's work is fantastic. You can go to nickylarkinfilm.com. There is links below on the bio. You can go there to his website. There is a trailer there also for Abomination, an incredible documentary that he made, and also a link to his Instagram. But a great writer-director, lives in Belfast from Birr in County Offaly, but he's been making some really powerful stuff over the last few years, so go check out his stuff. So here it is, my chat with the lovely Nicky Larkin. Thanks so much for being on the podcast, Nicky. You're very welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. Good, yeah. Delighted to be finally on a podcast. I've been listening to so many podcasts. It's good to actually be on one. Yeah.
Well, it's an honor to be popping your podcast cherry. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, I've been watching your work the last week or so, and I absolutely love what you've made. I love the films that you've been making. Maybe I'll ask you first about Abomination. Just an incredible documentary, and also captured like a social movement. He captured what was going on at the time. Tell me a bit about that one. It's actually maybe just describe what it's about too, so people will have an insight.
Well, there's this radical theatre company in Belfast that I'm kind of loosely associated with called the Belfast Ensemble, created by this genius composer by the name of theatre maker, director, writer, just a man of many talents called Conor Mitchell. And they did what they described as the world's first ever documentary opera in late 2019, where they took all of the homophobic statements said by the DUP over the last 30-40 years and put them to music and used the DUP's words as basically the lyrics of the opera. And so that in itself is a mad idea and very worthy of documentation. But then by pure fluke, this all landed at the same time as the marriage equality legislation was being passed in Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland was the only part of the UK and Ireland, and I think the whole of Europe, where marriage equality still wasn't a thing. And so the period was only 4 weeks anyway from the time the first day of rehearsals to the opening night in the Lyric Theatre in Belfast. With the marriage equality thing happening exactly halfway through that. So I just thought it's just telling an amazing story on multiple levels, and it's too good to not make a film about. So I applied to NI Screen, and it was even outside of official funding deadlines, but it was just such a mad story that it gave me a small bit of money, and that allowed me to start shooting with it, like a tiny little crew. And it was really a labour of love. It was, a few days shooting in the rehearsal rooms, then shooting when they moved to the Lyric, and then up at Stormont to capture the protest and celebration around the passing of the legislation. And then a big, massive edit, because, the first cut was probably about an hour and a half long. That's ridiculous. So it was like a huge, big edit. And then we finally got the film ready in a shape that was ready to be seen, and we had a launch date, a premiere arranged for QFT in Belfast, which is like the sort of the art house cinema in Belfast, for April 2020, and then boom, COVID struck, and that was the end of that. So it's finally having a bit of a life now. It's been hitting a few different festivals, and I'm just really glad that it's something that it's such a historic moment in Northern Irish history. I'm glad that I have it in the can, so that in 20 years I can look back at that and really capture the moment, a really seismic moment. And it was more than the sum of its parts. It's just one of those lucky times when an idea and the right time and all these different ingredients come together and you make something quite special.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's definitely a special piece of work, and like hopefully that people listening to this can eventually, when they have an opportunity to see it at a festival or something, they can get out and see it. There's something because you've been making some comedy as well, and there's something that like struck me and always kind of jumps out with like really good documentaries and let's say really good comedy, that sometimes you'd have an odd scene where it'd be like you couldn't write this, like for example, like it's reality, but let's say the event is so bizarre that like even talking about the thing in 20 years, like for example somebody watching that, and like even now it's completely bizarre, but just it will go into the realms of the ridiculous, you know, like by then, I think. But this scene where I think there was the protesters standing outside Stormont, was it? Like I was saying before, that's something that could be in, like, you know, like a top quality like mockumentary, you know, like the characters.
Or Ted.
Yeah, exactly.
My one, when we went up that day that the marriage equality was being passed, and at the time there had been no sitting government in Stormont, excuse me, for almost 3 years. And the DUP felt so completely horrified by the idea of two fellas or two girls getting married that they went back to government for the first time in 3 years to try and block this. Yeah. And so a lot of their kind of the more extreme headbanger Christian right were up at the, you know, with their placards and all this sort of thing. And my only concern for the whole day was to get somebody to say the word abomination. I was just determined, and I had all these tricks up my sleeve of how I would elicit this abomination. And I needn't have worried, within about 7 seconds, they were foaming at the mouth going on about abominations and sodomy and all of this, and using really sexual language as well, which was very bizarre. And like you said, you could not write that. And people have asked me, were they plants? You know, were they actors? Did you say no? I swear to you, they're real people.
Yeah, no, like real life is more bizarre, I think, than comedy. You know, an awful lot of the time. I saw something actually a few weeks ago, 'cause I found this YouTube channel of. This guy, I'll have to find it and send it, of this guy who's archived, you might know it, he's archived like loads and loads of Irish stuff, Irish footage, and it seems to be a pretty big YouTube account actually. It's all like high quality stuff going back. It's like kind of reeling in the years, but in depth, you know what I mean? It's everything's there. And there was a clip from 1986, and it was from Galway, and it was like the university in Galway who were screening like a kind of a film with like adult content in it, right? And all the local kind of let's say full on like
headbangers,
came down, and they're all outside the gates of the university. And in this case, the film did not get screened, you know, my God. But the rate of change in Ireland with this stuff is unbelievable, because like that's 1986, like that's within my lifetime. I would have been like, you know, 4 or something, and I grew up in Galway, and some of it is you see a little bit of that around still, but some of it is unrecognizable, like, you know, and there's a certain trauma to it, like, you know, I think there's been a kind of national trauma, you know, or something, you know, with the church or something. I don't know.
I don't think any other society has changed so radically in such a short space of time as, when I say Ireland, I mean the South, because not the North. But, you know, if you consider that in 1993, homosexual acts were illegal, and then in 2015, we became the first country in the world to vote for marriage equality, you know, to actually have a referendum and introduce it that way. And in that short space of time, the society has changed so drastically. And really the main thing that happened was we got rid of the church. And we kind of, because I don't think Irish people are naturally conservative. Look at the way we drink, you know, look at the way we party, and look at the Celtic Tiger. Look, everyone going off buying holiday homes in Bulgaria without even seeing them. And you know, just all this madness that is not really the actions of conservative people, you know. But I think it was foisted upon us for such a long time with this guilt and shame and cancel culture. Like I was reading an article yesterday with Sinead O'Connor. I'm always banging on about Sinead O'Connor these days.
I love Sinead O'Connor.
But the article was saying that she was the first victim of cancel culture in 1993 or 92 or whatever, when she ripped up that picture of the Pope on Saturday Night Live, and the whole of America went mad, and it sort of ended her career, or at least that part of her career. And this sort of this we're sort of getting onto a different topic now, but this is very familiar. Like this, the thing you were saying about the film in Galway in the 80s and people protesting it, and even say the likes of Monty Python and The Life of Brian, which was banned in Ireland, you know, and now we're starting to see all this again. But you know, this same sort of sensorial moral panic and outrage, but reframed in a totally different way. But it's shockingly familiar, and I think the problem is that the people who are at the forefront of it are just slightly too young to remember it from the first time around.
Right? Yeah. You know, I hear you completely there. And there's something about a kind of let's say. I'll jump up to the cancel culture in a second, just through this. But there is something about the kind of tragedy of how, let's say the impact of that kind of, let's say, like really like hard-nosed kind of religious kind of idea, the impact of that on people being able to explore really kind of basic and simple things like spirituality, let's say, in a kind of, without being like associated with like some kind of regime or some kind of institution, or like, I find that quite tragic because of like how much that can help people, like even just ideas of like, you know, in the last, let's say, you know, whatever 15 years or so, like, you know, there's been a big boost with that, like lots of people talking about meditation now, people talking about mindfulness, you know, but using these kind of terms where like this kind of culture needed something like even like you know, the power of now, that kind of stuff, where it's like it's reframing, like letting go of this kind of complicated fear-based mind that is the manifestation of the culture, you know what I mean? I think people are almost ashamed of like talking about that with friends, because like you're not like gone mad on religion, are you? You know, because the impact of that has been so deep, you know, and like you said, I think you're exactly right. It's the cancel culture stuff, like it's like polarization, like that's a religious kind of idea, isn't it? Like it's like, I'm right, you're wrong, you need to do this. Judgment, exactly. And
the willingness to point the finger at people and be outraged, and it's all very familiar, you know. It's all very familiar from 80s or early 90s sort of Catholic Ireland, I think.
What I feel as well is it's one of the reasons I really love your work as well. What I feel gets lost when it's all about, let's say, intellectualization, and it's all about like, as in, let's say, okay, so throw away everything that could be like, let's say, a deeper level of awareness or consciousness, because religion has traumatized me, you know, because of the players in that world. But then when it comes to something like creativity and art and all that, like for me, the creative spark is something that comes kind of from a deeper place than my kind of, let's say, my planning and micromanaging kind of brain, you know. Like I can't say I'm going to sit down and write my best song today, you know. Like little bits of ideas come as the day goes on, or like as the weeks go on, or stuff just kind of lands in, you know. It's like a kind of letting, often the times a lot of letting go rather than a lot of willing it into existence, I guess. But it's kind of like, I think basically, this is a really long point, man, I'm really sorry, but I've noticed with, I don't know, maybe it's something like around, I'll pick acting as a really good example of it, okay? there's a little bit of a tendency for people to regard actors as robots or something these days, rather than as human beings with emotions and deeper experiences they can bring to it. It's, I think, because of a lack of, I think because of a focus on almost technicality. It's all about like, you know, I guess the kind of like, let's say directing is often all just about the shots and just about rather than like, let's see what the humanity that comes out, you know, like let's create a safe space for that to happen. But I see that in your work, that it's like, it's human, you know. I see that coming through. And
it's probably because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to feeling it out, you know.
Well, man, I think whatever you're doing is amazing, because like also like you started as a like visual artist, though, didn't you?
Yeah, and I think the fact that I don't really have any formal training in how to make films is maybe what you're kind of talking about a bit, in that I don't come to it with sort of all of this baggage of film school, you know. And I studied, I always thought I would be a painter, you know, and for the first few years of third level, that's what I was. And there was in Clonmara, because you're from Galway too, you probably know a lot of people I'm talking about. In Clonmara, there's two courses. There's the fine art and the film and TV, or at least there was back then. And the fine art was portfolio based, and then the film and TV was just points based. And then it was a really interesting dynamic to watch the difference, because there was more creativity under the little baby fingernail of any of the fine arts students than there was of these film and TV geeks, who were all these like weird creatures who used to speak with these kind of half American accents because they'd watched so much Friends, and they really had no creativity in them at all. And I remember when I was learning to edit, and this guy I knew on the film and TV course, he wanted to show me, they had to do this little exercise where they had to shoot like a 2-minute scene of somebody coming up to a doorway and the snow and ringing the doorway and handing a package, and it was all about creating the mood and the tone. And he did this really delicate, nicely shot little thing, and then the end credits was like death metal come on it. And he was after failing, and the lecturer was after slating him, and he could not understand what was wrong with this, you know. Right. And that to me was just so typical of the difference between those two courses, was because the art people were genuine creative people, and the film and TV were academics who wanted to be, or academically minded who wanted to be involved in film and TV. And so I think I'm not, you know, I think a lot of the most interesting directors, even historically, came out of fine art. They didn't come out of film school, you know, particularly in Europe. But, you know, I think that there is downsides to that as well, in that I genuinely don't know what I'm doing half the time, you know. So I'm just kind of feeling it as I go, just sort of making it up as I go along.
Well, man, I relate with you on the, like, making it up as I go along, not knowing what I'm doing kind of idea. But, like, ironically, you obviously do know what you're doing. You're making loads of great films. You know, that's what it is. That's what you're doing, you know. And I've you know, made a bunch of shorts as well over the years and things like that. I haven't done it for a little while now, but it's like I came in from, I actually did a kind of part-time course for a few months up in Clonmara. It was like around like it was every weekend for a couple of months at the end of 2015, and then I went and kind of made a short after that. But from there on, it was all just me trying to make stuff, and it was like the learning experience right there. It was like just being thrown in. I remember the second short I made was a film called Secret Hiding Place, and it was like set in the 80s on a farm, and basically there was like basically a gay guy growing up on a farm in the 80s, you know, and he's planning an escape, and there's a family stations mask basically coming up at the weekend, and everyone's coming, and his uncle's coming over from London, and he's going to ask his uncle, can he kind of skip on the train with him, basically head back after. But basically I remember the first day of that shoot, and the first scene was like the scene where there was like the station's mass, you know, and there's all these extras arriving in all these 80s clothes and stuff. And I filmed it at my parents' house, and like I was like next door, and I was just getting some bits and pieces, and you know, and I was actually playing like the lead character as well. I wasn't initially going to do it, but like the actor pulled out, you know, a week before, and I was actually playing the lead as well. And I was like, this is nuts. And I remember just going up to this house next door, and I was looking out the window, and I saw these people arriving. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing?
Just run away.
No, it's like I literally have to go down there and pretend I know what I'm doing, you know what I mean? It's in like, okay, first shot, let's do the first shot and let's go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely identify with that. And I what I have learned is that directing is just one big confidence trick. It's just you have to pretend that you know what's going on and you're completely in control, and then everybody else will be relaxed. If you're flapping about the place like a gormless Egypt, the whole thing is, even if that's the way you feel inside, you have to present this sort of demeanor of, I know exactly what I'm doing here, because that's all that matters, because everybody else knows what they're doing. All these guys do this every day of the week, you know, everyone in the sound department and camera and gaffer and all these people, makeup, this is their you know, they do this all the time. Whereas when you're directing something, you're not going to actually be on set very often, you know, so you have to pretend what you know what you're doing, and then they all know what they're doing anyway, and then it all works out.
It's a funny balance as well, because like the awareness of like, I'm just gotta make this happen, I've just gotta what I always focused on was like, well, like I'm big into like, you know, actors, acting and performance. So I was like, if I can just try to make a space where that happens, that's something I can focus on, you know. And but there was like I was working with a comedian once, like, you know, not so long after that time, and you know, like directing a piece that we were doing, and he was acting in it, and I was like, still this thing where I'm like, you know, by the seat of my pants and everything, and he literally said to me before the shoot, do we really need a director? And this is a classic comedian shit, you know, because I've been a comedian myself, and it's like this. It's like complete another like can't I direct everything like everything else in my life? And it's like, I'm like, you do need. And he goes like, well, but you're just trying to boss people around, basically. That was basically speaking of like polarization, if this was a social media thing, one gang would be like, oh, the fucking directors, they're just like bossy pricks, they're just acting out in the world, you know what I mean? And the other side is like, I don't know, like you know, oh, like what would the world be without that genius, you know, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And the reality is somewhere in the middle, as always.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I found that as well, though, with actors. In my limited experience, it's all about like just letting them go at it, you know, letting them do their thing, you know, and knowing when to sort of stand back and just let them, you know, let them do it. Yeah, it's interesting. I would never try and, you know, because I don't feel like I know anything about acting, you know, but I know what I want, you know. I think I have a good instinct for comedy, you know, and I kind of know how to make it funnier. But in terms of developing these characters, I'm really interested in how actors do that, and you know, the rehearsal process and their own sort of process is fascinating, and it's fascinating to watch, even when you're supposed to be directing it. But sometimes you just need to just know when to step back a little bit and let them go for it. Yeah,
the chemistry that can happen between people can be almost like all you need sometimes as well, you know?
Yeah.
Thinking about, like, we've spoken a few times about, like, Father Ted. I know you're just this, like, you know, you were absolutely, like, a massive fan of that.
Obsessed.
As well. Yeah, and likewise, you know, and there's something about the magic there of, like, even the combination of those people that were on that set. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, if you changed one of them out, you know, maybe some of the minor ones that would have worked fine, but generally speaking, it's like a balancing act, isn't it? Just
Yeah. I actually was talking to somebody who was working on Father Ted, an actor, and he said, I was very curious to know, did you know how big this was going to be? Did you have any idea? And I won't say who it was, but this particular actor, he says, to be honest, I didn't really get it. I was just sort of, he was only in for a day, you know, and he was looking around going, this is a bit fucking mad, you know? And lo and behold, 25 years later, it's still on the TV every week, you know?
Yeah. No, it's something else, man. It's a classic, like, and so that seed was sown when you were younger, and like, did you always want to kind of move into some comedy stuff? Because just to give people a bit of an insight, Nicky recently made a great comedy short, gone viral. That you won even a few awards with that, didn't you, recently?
Yeah, it's been very well received. Yeah.
It's really great stuff. But like, was the comedy seed always there?
It definitely was, but I didn't know how to do it. I didn't think it would be something that I just didn't see where the avenue would be to get into it, because I remember the first, as we talked about before, the first time I saw Father Ted. I'll never forget it. You know, I never forget being in pain, in physical pain from laughing. You know, like actually my stomach was trying to catch my breath, and I was probably like 12, something like that, and it was like nothing else I'd ever seen. And I recognize now that it was the anarchy of it that you know I was really attracted to. And the madness of it and the surrealism of it, and it was like a light bulb went off. I was like, you know, that I would love to do something like that, but it's not that I didn't know how you would do that. You know, I've always felt I was on this path of drawing and painting. That was my thing, you know. And also back in those days, in the pre-digital era, I didn't know how would you even make a film or make it, you know, unless you had all this gear, unless you had a family member who was involved in the film industry, or you had some kind of connection, you know. Whereas today it's so democratic, anybody with an iPhone can make a comedy short and can put it up online, and it can be viewed by 1 million people if it's good, you know. And there's a downside to that, because obviously everyone can do it, so there's a whole lot of shit as well. But I think it's sort of democratized the process, and I wonder if I was 12 today, you know, would that be something I would sort of catch on to, or maybe not, you know? But I think it's been a long road to get to doing comedy. But I can look back now and see it was always in the pipeline. You know, I just had to figure out how to do it, how to make it happen.
Yeah, man. You made me think of when I was like about 17, 18. A friend of mine, basically my best mate from back home, like he's one of the funniest guys, Brian Mannion, that you could ever meet. And when I first started doing comedy, we did it together as a double act, you know what I mean? And but the first thing we did was like with his parents' video camera, that was like I think like high 8 video camera, and like with they had like a big videotape with a little thing for putting the small videotape in for watching it back. And we basically just did like stop, record, stop, next bit, record, stop, you know, with the video camera. Did this thing, man. And like, it was literally like the excitement around doing this stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like this ridiculous shit, you know? And a few years ago at Christmas, I went over to his house and he was like, oh, I think I found the tape, you know, and he pulled it out, and it was like taped over with like local hurling or something like this.
Oh no!
But
nightmare.
But the thing is, like, I'm just trying to think of, like, you know, the people now probably making stuff with phones, like, what's going to come of this, you know, down the line with comedy? Like, there could be a comedy like explosion, you know. And
Yeah.
I think there needs to be as well. I think there needs to be a, like, this is only my own opinion, but there's been some amazing stuff made the last like 10 years, but there's also an awful lot of like let's say dramedy, if you know what I mean. I want to see a little bit of like silly, but like quality silly. And I don't mean like there's a brand of silly that's like, oh, let's put on cheap wigs, that we just
not Mrs. Brown's Boys. Nobody needs any more of that.
No, or there's a bunch of the kind of like, because it's comedy, let's not take it seriously. Like let's fudge all the production elements, let's say. Do you know what I mean? But I think there's something about taking all the elements, just like being very serious about comedy, and then just like letting the silliness happen. In that space.
Yeah. It's an interesting time for comedy as well, because it feels like a dangerous time. That like. If you try and even watch Father Ted on the 4OD Channel 4 player now, on certain episodes there's like a content warning at the start, and and I feel, I mean, the one I was talking about before was the Chinese one about the Great Bunch of Lads, which fundamentally is an episode about the Irish people's fear of being seen as being racist, But the woke militia came for it with the pitchforks, saying this is racist, and that for me is just like that just encapsulates the lack of nuance around this. There's no critical thinking going on here. It's just black and white, good and bad, and that's a dangerous position. And I think it's going to get a lot worse before it kind of rectifies itself.
Yeah, and it's also really dangerous that, let's say, the so-called authority on this like woke stuff is literally like people who are just generating fear, like as in like with cancel culture and all that, like people's entire careers potentially being derailed, or like coming off social media, or like losing contracts, opportunities to make new stuff. All that thing is happening with people, but it's like who is perpetuating this, like kind of randomers, like it's not it's not coming from any like well thought out place. It's just reaction, and I think a lot of it is kind of just cynicism and negativity too. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I just would like to say, at this point, that I don't want to come across as somebody who's anti any of the sort of the ideas behind this. I mean, I am a big fan of political correctness, because the alternative is like racism and homophobia and transphobia and all this sort of horrible stuff. But there's a line somewhere. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that I'm not a fan of cancel culture, but I do appreciate the ideas behind it, and it's a very difficult conversation to, you look at somebody, I don't know, it's I'm very conflicted, particularly speaking of Father Ted, even the likes of Graham Linehan. That is so disappointing to me, that he's gone on this crusade of transphobia, a guy that his whole career was about sort of putting two fingers up to the Catholic Church and to the authorities and all this sort of stuff, or not the authorities, but the you know what I'm saying, the time, and then he comes out and he's all this, like, it's like he has some sort of mental, I don't know, he's gone mad. Like, he really hates trans people, and he's gone into sustained, well, he would say it's not about trans people, it's about protecting women's spaces and all this. But if you look back through some of the stuff he's been on his Twitter, it's outrageous, and I do appreciate why a guy like that shouldn't really be allowed. You see, even when I'm saying it out loud, I'm conflicted. Should he be deplatformed? Should he not be allowed, have a voice? Should he not be allowed work? I don't know, because the stuff that he's saying is genuinely dangerous to a lot of people. It's putting a lot the trans people in, you know, this tiny marginalized community, and then he's sort of like spewing out all this toxic bile against them, and you know, the other high profile ones like J.K. Rowling and all that sort of stuff. But should they be deplatformed? I don't know. I don't know where I stand on it all. It's a very difficult conversation. That's an extreme example. There's less extreme examples of people losing their careers and their livelihoods for way less damaging stuff than anything Graham Linehan has come out with.
Yeah, sure. I hear you, and like it feels like what's missing is just lack of conversation, and then there's this whole thing where like, oh, but there is conversation because it's Twitter or whatever. But I feel like, this is just my own opinion, but I feel like apart from all the great things that have come from like social media, especially Twitter, like as in people around the world who haven't had a voice or are able to, you know, express themselves and all that. But apart from that, like around like big issues like this, like there's no nuance to conversation, and it's all people reacting. It's all reactivity, and that's, I think, it's
just shouting.
Yeah, it's not healthy, because like that goes nowhere, and then everyone's defenses are up and they go harder and they're on their side, and it's like, and also people who are not well, let's say for example, who are just kind of who might have like quite a following or something, like just kind of going for it, you know what I mean? Like that's not safe either, because, you know, let's say in the old traditional forms of like media, with all their flaws, like let's say if somebody was like going through a lot of heavy stuff, you know, and they had some kind of talk show or panel show and they were not well, like at the time, they might be suggested that, you know, you take a break for a while, you know, like to, you know, work out your stuff. But there's with I just think with the social media stuff, there's just no filter, and everyone's kind of insanity gets out there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and the madder you are, the more attention you get as well, which is
so it pays off.
Dangerous. Yeah, it does. Yeah, and it's not good for anybody. And I think when you watch something like that documentary, The Social Dilemma, and you kind of come to the conclusion that this needs to be made illegal. You know, this social media it's really toxic. It is, you know, really ruined all sorts of things in a very short space of time. You can't have the kind of takeaway from that Social Dilemma film was that it's actually impossible to have a free and fair election anymore because of all of these sinister sort of you know, Cambridge Analytica type companies that are going to really far to influence the results of elections, and you know, as you say, everybody's shouting at each other, and it gets the backs up, and the people go more polarized, and yeah, I mean, it's terrifying to think what's it. That's only in 15 years. You know, what's it going to be like in another 15 years? And what's the answer to that? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is really it's really interesting. I hope that like in terms of, let's say, even like comedy, I hope some, you know, it almost feels like that's what's kind of needed now to kind of break, because all this stuff that we're talking about, it's all so serious, like everything's like, and everybody is a spokesperson now for something as well, you know, because like even agents, you know, advising actors, you know, like you better get on this particular thing, and you know, and I think, you know, I agree with you around like around, you know, like standing for causes like, you know, like transphobia, like being anti-transphobia and all that kind of stuff. Like there are marginalized groups everywhere who are kind of put at risk by that kind of vitriol, you know, like they literally are, because then suddenly the safety decreases even more, you know, for these groups. And I had Charlie Craggs a month ago, I think, on this podcast as well, who is kind of in the middle of that kind of world right now, you know, with campaigning, you know, about transphobia. And it was just really interesting to kind of hear about, like on a human level, how terrifying that stuff is to kind of pop up on a feed or whatever, you know.
Yeah, because it's genuinely life-threatening for these people that are already completely marginalised and a tiny percentage of the overall population. And so for you know, 1% of the population, they get all of this disproportionate heat from all of these crazies on social media. And but again, it's history repeating itself. It's like the homophobia of the 80s is now is like transphobia is a new thing, and we need to be on the right side of history with this. You know, we want to in 10 or 20 years time, we want to be able to kind of say, you know, just be on the right side of history. And when it's all completely normalized, we want to be able to look back and say we behaved in the right way around this. We weren't, you know, we weren't the same bigots that were around in the 80s. You know, it's just history going in cycles.
Yeah, exactly. And inevitably it's going to be messy, and it's going to be like, it's kind of like looking back, it's like, how can I like be of kind of difference going forward, you know? Like, I think it's always going to be like that, you know. The people after our generation too might look at this particular period in time and go like, what the fuck was that? You know?
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
I think it's sort of correcting itself as well. There's like we went through this period of real bigotry for a long time, that anyone who was different was targeted. And maybe all of this cancel culture is just this sort of like the correctional period, and then it will level off and we'll all be friends. But I mean, that's a sort of optimistic outlook.
Well, you know, I like that outlook. Like I think it's the only outlook, because when you think about it, believing that things are going to just implode and that we're all going to just end up killing each other is just like completely useless, you know, as well. I was going to ask you as well, how does it feel, like when you did Gone Viral? How did it feel, first of all, making something in lockdown? Like, what was that experience like? And also, what's it like working in Belfast and, like, you know, kind of treading the political, like, backdrop as well, you know, through the work, because it's always going to be there, you know. I
think that the perception people have of Northern Ireland who are not living in Northern Ireland is really outdated. And I myself was of a similar sort of problem when I came up here first. I was only talking to someone about this over the weekend. We were sitting having coffee on the Ormeau Road, and there's like a big Union Jack flag hanging from a lamppost, and it's really quite that section of the Ormeau Road is just hipsters, you know, just like, you know, sourdough bread and you know, avocado toast. But there happened to be
sourdough bastards.
Yeah, get them out. There happened to be like a Union Jack flag hanging from the lamppost, and we were just remarking about how we don't really even see it anymore, you know. And I remember, and I was talking about the first night that I arrived in Belfast in June 2014, and I was living just around the corner from that place, and I went out to go to the little Tesco Express on the street, and I saw those Union Jacks, and I remember the fear and the panic and going, Jesus, I can't let them hear my accent, you know. And this, because I had this ridiculous southerner sort of idea about what Belfast was, which was all based on growing up during the Troubles, and the 9 o'clock news every night was something horrible happening in Belfast. And then after a little while, and for the first sort of 6 months in Belfast, you're hyper aware of this. You know, you're sort of like, you're always looking out for these little markers, whether it's GAA jerseys or you know, Rangers jerseys or whatever, and then you just stop noticing it, and nobody really talks about it. You might read about little bits and pieces on the news. It's just not a thing. It's not part of life, in my experience up here anyway. You know, and I think that's why it's very important to make content, whether that be, you know, comedy or documentary or whatever, that is about Northern Ireland but isn't about the Troubles, because I think we've had it up to our necks with like stuff that's about the Troubles. And I think it's time to tell other stories from Northern Ireland, because there's so much more happening here. And yeah, like you said, it's always a little thing in the background, but it doesn't have to be the centre of the conversation. And
I love that, man.
I think that as well, the amount of people, when I go home, like, well, not that during the COVID, but I remember, like, you go back to Borough Christmas time and you'd be chatting to your friends or whatever, and the amount of them that will never have been to Belfast, and they'll have been to Bangkok and Brisbane and, you know, wherever, Buenos Aires, I'm trying to think of other B's frantically, but then they'll never have been to Belfast, and so we still have this like psychological hard border on Northern Ireland as Southerners, and I think if we just came up here a bit more, we'd realise that it's just the same, really. I mean, there might be different colour flags in certain areas and all, and it all gets a bit mental in July for a little while. But apart from that, I mean, it's really moved on massively. I remember I came up here in 2005 for an interview for an art college thing. I was going to do an MA up here, and even then it was a much grimmer city. Like the amount of development and the amount, it really is just full of hipsters. If you walk around the city centre, and you know, the Cathedral Quarter, it's just like hipster beards and fancy coffees everywhere, you know.
The hipsters are the unifiers all around the world. They bring us all together. They are what makes me remember that I'm a human being, you know, that we're all the same, you know. There's hipsters in every corner of the world. You got the Italian hipsters, you got the East London hipsters. There's one more thing I wanna open up or ask you about. Nowhere in Ireland more will you find polarization when it comes to the man himself, Bono. And I read your article. Was that the Irish Times that was published in?
Sunday
Independent. It's really interesting. I just thought I'd touch on it because just the references in the conversations we've had recently about you two and the Ireland thing, I always found it really fascinating. You know, I thought it was interesting that you had a kind of keen interest as well. I
think it's like a secret in certain quarters, like we talked about. It's almost like uncool to say you like U2. There's this sort of snobbery about it in Ireland only, and then everywhere else they're completely the legends that they actually are, you know. It's a very interesting thing. It's the Irish begrudgery, you know. This whole thing of if anyone sticks their head up too far, we need to chop it off immediately. And I think that is in all elements of Irish life. And I think it'd be interesting to see is that will the new generation be afflicted by that? And I don't think they will, because social media is all about who can stick their head up above the water the highest. You know?
That's really interesting.
But it's this old thing from our, I hate going on about our generation because it sounds like we're fucking ancient, but
we're only in our early 60s. We're not too bad.
But like, you know, when you were in secondary school, all you wanted to do was to be the same as everyone else. You know, the worst thing you could be was stand out too much, you know. And I think it's an extension of that. This fella going around the place speaking at summits and being an expert on everything and really sticking his head up out there, when, you know, he could just sit at home and count his money, you know, but he doesn't, and he has educated himself on all of these topics. And I think people sort of, I can understand why it might be a bit annoying, but what you have to look at really is, this is a band who wrote like Sunday Bloody Sunday, when they were like, what, 21, something like that.
Yeah.
I will follow all of this stuff that if you go to see one of their gigs now, and it's so hypocritical because they'll sell out Crow Park.
Yeah,
like
I was going to say that.
I was
going to say that.
250,000 people will buy tickets in about 79 seconds.
Yeah.
But yet, fucking U2, you know.
Yeah.
And then you go to one of these gigs and the opening cracks of Sunday Bloody Sunday, and you just get like the goosebumps, and then you remember, these guys wrote that 40 years ago. And, you know, do you think that you could stand by anything that you wrote when you were 20? Because I know that I can't, you know. I can't stand by anything I wrote 5 years ago. And so it's this, like, prodigious level of talent that they have that made them into this biggest band in the world. And it wasn't an accident, you know. It didn't happen by fluke. And they've kept doing it. And they've kept, you know... You might not like some of their stuff. Like me personally, I have sort of peaks and troughs with U2. There's certain eras. I'm all about 90s U2.
Yeah.
I think because I kind of like a bit more the electronic stuff. I like dance music, hip hop, stuff like that anyway. So I like that experimentation. But also I think everybody always likes the music that hit them at a certain formative point, you know?
Yeah.
And for me, that was like the Pop album when I was like 14, 13, getting that album. And that just, for me, Pop is my favorite album. And
I love Pop. I love it.
Yeah, it's disappointing that they never even play those songs anymore at gigs. It's like it's almost their forgotten album, and I keep waiting for a remaster because they're always going on about how they didn't have time to finish Pop properly, and I think it is a work of genius. I think it doesn't need to be finished, but I'd love to see like a 20th anniversary. We're probably past that. Pop. What year would that be?
97.
Yeah. So it'll be a 30th anniversary Pop or 25, but they're never going to do it because there's not the appetite. Like the real hardcore 80s U2 fans can't abide Pop.
Yeah, it's funny, you know. I love Pop as well. Like it's up there with like my favorites. Some of my favorite U2 songs. They're like If God would Send His Angels. That one, I love that song. Playboy Mansion. Do You Feel Loved? All these songs, they're just amazing.
Amazing,
yeah. It's a little bit like an adolescent grudge, you know, the U2 thing, I think, because it's a bit like, you know, when you're in school and you're acting all cool and like, you know, I'm into this and that, and like kind of there's a kind of a character there, but you know, you have a rough time and all you want is a hug from your mammy, you know. you don't want anyone to know that, but I see that a little bit, like, I was like, fuck you doing that fucking wanker, what's he fucking doing now? Fucking Kofi Annan and fucking this, you know what I mean? And then you see them all filing into Slane, you know, like like jumping around. I hope no one notices me. Oh, there's everyone I know. Oh, it's fine. It's like being at a swingers party. As long as we don't tell everyone, as long as we all know, it's okay. And they're just like, fucking New Year's Day or whatever it is, jumping around. It's an amazing thing, and I think as well that from what I've kind of read about them, I think they have almost like listened to the pushback on something like Pop. Like they also always sound a little bit dismissive of it, you know what I mean? But it does sound like them at their most creative, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but same as that. I read a few things about that where they had to cancel gigs in like America, you know, in certain cities in the Midwest of America because they didn't sell enough tickets during the Pop Mart tour, and this really shook them to the core. And they says, wow, you know, and then they went back to the different direction, and then the next album after that, All That You Can't Leave Behind, is really quite back to sort of more 80s like U2, and went completely, because I think
great album
Pop
too
was great album, but Pop was almost like they sort of went to, as the famous line about going away to reimagine it or think about, you know, come up with it all over again or whatever at the end of the 80s, and then they came back with Octung Baby, which is amazing, and then it got even weirder with Zeropa. It's like really quite out there, really a brilliant album. And then sort of the natural the next step to all of that was pop, and then it was like those Midwest American gigs. They were like, okay, we were with you up to now, but this, no, drum machines and all. No, forget it. And then so then they kind of got a bit afraid.
Yeah.
I mean, who am I to tell you what they were thinking? But that's what my read on it from how they pivoted again after pop.
Again, it's the kind of thing that in 20 years' time, it'll be like looking back at that whole thing. It'll be like, you know, what actually was that, you know, and what actually was the reaction to it. You know what I mean? Like you think about things like people in the UK, like English kind of very proper. Stiff upper lip kind of English people in the 60s when the Beatles came out, you know, the parents of those teenagers that were going mad, you know. It was probably like the 1986 Galway adult movie reaction, do you know what I mean? And in that moment there's all this information going on, and maybe only down the line we'll know what it all means, you know.
Yeah.
It's funny,
but it's an album that I keep going back to pop. You know, I every few years I would go back and listen to it. And it's I listen to it all the way through, and that's something that I think we've lost as well with like Spotify and streaming. Is that albums, the idea of an album, you know, the idea of getting into an album, for giving it an hour and getting into this really, and you can, you know, this experience of this sort of cohesive group of songs all together, that a feeling that you get from an album. And I wonder, has that kind of, to a certain degree, that's not the way it is anymore, where people are just, it's, you know, it's individual songs for streaming. The ritual of that is like gets a bit lost in even the thing of like, oh, I want that album, and like, oh, like, you know, okay, when will I be able to afford to go and buy it? Like, oh, like, you know, 2 weeks, and then going to the shop, you know, and seeing it, and we used to get the bus. We used to have to get the bus from Burr to Tullamore because there was no music shop in Burr, and so on a Friday we used to get out of school at 1:45. And I remember so clearly when All That You Leave Behind was coming out, and I was probably in 5th year, and on the Friday that it was released, a couple of us got the bus for half an hour from Burr over to Tullamore to buy an album for like 20 quid, and then like got the bus back, still hadn't listened to it, got the bus back, and then finally was able to listen to it when we got home. It's like, oh my God, has anything changed so much? You know, the preciousness that you had around these CDs when you didn't think twice about spending 20 quid on it. Yeah. Imagine spending 20 quid on it.
I know.
And that must be heartbreaking for you in particular as a musician.
Yeah, it's a weird one, and I was in the very tail end of being able to sell CDs. You know, I was in this band at one point, 2009, 2010 in Ireland, and we were doing loads of, you know, gigs, and it was like, you know, playing all the time, and we were selling this CD that we had, you know, it was like this EP. It was like we would sell a bunch of them every time, you know, and it was like noticeable, like a noticeable shift, you know, in terms of like, oh, we really can like invest in the next part of the band now. Do you know what I mean? Stuff like that. And but I have to say now I'm not one to hanker for the CDs anymore, in terms of like you know, there's a lot of people I think clinging onto that business model, let's say like musicians and that really need to let go, because the reality has shifted so much that there's a different impetus now on like people basically building as large an audience as they can, do you know what I mean? And then that's where they can actually start to make some money then, even, you know. But it's like it's a new world. But I noticed at one point where I actually did my first gig in a year, like last on Saturday there actually.
Nice. How was that?
It was really great, but it was really weird. It was in a packed full of people, and I was like, I haven't been around this many people in so long. Do you know what I mean? And like I had been vaccinated recently, so it's like not really. It feels okay to do it, but it's really weird as well. But then the reality, which was, I think, even this year, 2021, because there has been a shift more so than ever people into technology, like as in everyone's zooming all the time, people are like on their phones way more, and it was the first gig in the longest time where I was like, well, the first gig ever where I was like, there's no point in bringing CDs, like the first time. Like, because there would always be one or two people who would buy one, but I just kind of made it like that is not worth packing them in and bringing them now. That's over. It's officially over. Like I can like pulp them like Alan Partridge with his book, you know.
And like new laptops and computers don't even have CD or DVD.
No, they don't.
Players on them anymore.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be just done now, you know. And it's just bizarre just noticing that. It's like the awareness that like there's no fucking way, and they're going to look ridiculous there. It's like it'd be like setting up.
Who's
like
this guy with
like,
CDs?
Yeah. It'd be like setting up a stall with like tapes, you know. I played at a wedding once, and a good friend of mine's uncle said to her, he was like, "Yes, your man's fucking great, isn't he? Do you think he has any tapes?" So it's the best reaction ever to my music. But man, look, it's been brilliant talking to you, man. Thanks so much for being on the podcast and for
thanks for having me.
And hopefully we can do it again down the line. Maybe I'll have like, you know, we'll go into double figures with our listeners, you know, before long. But
yeah, you never know. In about 15 years, people will be combing back through these to find something they can cancel us for.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. You're on the right episode. Yeah. You found it. Okay, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks a million, Emmet.
Well, there you go. What a cool chat for episode 11 of Resonating with Emmet O'Malley. It was lovely to have you here. To support this podcast, remember, go to patreon.com/Emmet O'Malley. Have a great week, folks. I will talk to you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.